like to start with the work of the foundation does for those who have fallen, for their families, for veterans. Obviously, there is a government institution whose job is to take care of these people for all the social benefits. Why are you doing this? Why is it important?
Well, government does assist. We have a Veterans Administration and they assist with medical issues. But the people who serve in the armed forces in all of our countries sacrifice on behalf of the people of the country, and their families contribute in an important way. And what I've decided, my wife and I have decided, that we'd like to have our foundation provide assistance to a variety of charities, military charities, that assist people in the military, people who have been in the military and are now out, as well as their families, in a variety of different ways. And we feel very fortunate that we've been able to do that. And we've had a chance to meet with an awful lot of the people in the military, and they're appreciative of it. And it's been a good thing to do.
What's the rewarding part of the job?
The rewarding part of the job? Well, you have a chance any chance you have to meet with the people who've served and their families and their children and look them in the eye and thank them is gratifying. They appreciate it. And you normally don't see their families as much. When you visit military bases around the world, you rarely see the families. I've been very fortunate because I've written a couple of books recently, and I've done book signings at military bases in the United States and overseas. And as a result, I've had a chance to personally express my appreciation to the folks who served our country or are serving now. And they appreciate that, and it's important that they be recognized for the sacrifices they make.
The foundation's grants also make possible for think tanks and young politicians from countries like Azerbaijan to mix with decision makers in Washington, D.C., to get to see U.S. institutions. Why do you think it's important to reach out to people who think, talk, and work differently?
Well, I had to spend a good deal of time in Central Asia and the South Caucasus and Afghanistan, Mongolia, the 10 countries that our foundation now focuses on, when I was in government. And they've got big neighbors with Russia and China. They have the European Union nearby. And it struck me that it would be helpful if, as they moved away from communist systems, they had linkages and relationships in the United States and in other countries where the people have experienced free market systems and freer political systems. You know, when the Iron Curtain came down at the end of the Cold War, I'm from Chicago, and of course we had a lot of people from Poland and Czechoslovakia and the Eastern European countries living in Chicago. And they reached out. And as these countries had to navigate a very bumpy road from an authoritarian system and a command economy to a freer economy and a freer political system, having relationships with people in the United States was helpful. And so I realized we didn't have a lot of Uzbeks or Tajiks or Kazakhs in the United States, and so I thought, well, why don't we bring over some folks, and as they make that transition.
You said that the visits and firsthand, when you get to know things, you change your opinion. You visited Azerbaijan several times.
Mm-hmm.
How did these visits change what you think or used to think about the country?
Well, I had occasion to be aware of that part of the world as a government official, but not any first-hand linkage. What happens when you start visiting a country and meeting the people, you meet them there, and then when their people come over to our country, we meet them here. And all of a sudden, you know what a pigeonhole is? A pigeon, the bird They have little holes, and what develops in a person is a bunch of pigeonholes in your mind, so that when you read an article or see something on television or someone calls you about something, you file it away. And if you don't have any first-hand experience, you don't have those pigeonholes in your thinking.
Azerbaijan is sandwiched between the two neighbors, Russia in the north and Iran in the south. How do you think the United States and Western countries' role comes in helping this new independent country, given its very complicated neighborhood?
It is a complicated neighborhood. Well, my impression is that it's a long way from the United States, and it has very close neighbors. And we didn't even mention Turkey, for example. And of course there are Azeris in neighboring countries. A lot of them in Iran, in the northern part. I think that the important thing is, how does your country think of itself? How does your country view its role in the region? And what kind of a strategy going forward are you going to develop? Are you going to be buffeted by your neighbors? Or is that part of the world going to fashion an identity and a strategy for going forward that it best suits your country and the region? And I think that is the important question. And what role the United States should or would play, or other neighboring countries, I think is really dependent upon what the countries in the region want other countries to play.
Until very recently, Iran, our other neighbor, has been referred by the United States as an evil country. Now things are changing. So what is your observations? Are you happy with the current dialogue? And would you like to see the United States reopen its embassy in Tehran one day? Do you really believe in political will of the new leadership of Iran?
Well, you know, I can't see around corners any better than anyone else. I look at that situation and I think of what Iran is doing with Syria. I think of what Iran has done with respect to terrorist organizations, the financing of them, the arming of these organizations. I think of the number of times Iran has disappointed the international community with respect to its nuclear program. I don't know the new leadership in the country, but I kind of adhere to President Reagan's thought that you can trust but verify. And I know what happens in Iran is enormously important to your country and to neighboring countries. It's also going to affect what happens with respect to Saudi Arabia and other nations in the region that have the ability to develop nuclear weapons. And you could end up, if Iran continues the path it's been on previously of pursuing a nuclear program, my impression is that you could lead to proliferation of nuclear programs in other countries in the Middle East and the region, which is not going to be in anybody's interest, their interest or the region's interest. So I guess I'd have to say that I'm not intimate with the negotiations that are taking place, but I do think the sanctions have had an effect, and only time will tell what. I mean, the reality is, at least looking at it from afar, the Ayatollahs were in charge before the change in the presidency. The Ayatollahs are in charge today, after the change in the presidency. Has anything changed with the Ayatollahs? I don't sense it. I haven't seen it. They haven't indicated that that's the case. The new leadership has made some sounds as though they were willing to talk and discuss things, but I think only time will tell. I think it would be unwise to place a lot of confidence that something has changed fundamentally, because the senior religious leadership in that country has not changed. It continues to say things that are sharply anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Israel, and
So, do you believe in new sanctions?
in new sanctions?
Do you support new sanctions?
I think it would be perfectly appropriate for the Congress to pass new sanctions and have them available in the event that they saw any deviation in behavior on the part of the Iranians. But the president has announced he'd veto it, I guess, which I think is probably not a good idea. But I do note that both members of both political parties in the United States have indicated that they thought it would be appropriate to have that capability to reimpose sanctions of some sort in the event they saw the Iranian government basically falling into its own old pattern.
Mr. Rams, a lot of talk is going on that when the United States withdraws its troops from Iraq, all those coalition in Iraq will not be needed. The United States, there will be new reality for U.S. Who is its allies? Who is its partners? I know that you've worked hard to get this coalition there, including Azerbaijan's support for the Iraq coalition. Do you agree with that the countries like Azerbaijan will not be needed, that their importance will fall down, and that everything will be completely different? What's going to happen to that coalition? What's going to happen to this relationship that you worked so hard to build?
Yeah. I think the international coalition that was involved in Iraq and Afghanistan made a valuable contribution to each of those countries. I think it's a mistake to completely disband it in any way. I think that those countries are finding their way, just as other countries have had to find their way over the years. Certainly the United States, when it broke loose from Great Britain, had to find its way and develop relationships. And each country's going to do it in their own way, in their own time, in their own fashion. And while other countries cannot nation build, you can't create a nation and do it for them. They have to do it for themselves. But by golly, having neighbors and friends that are helpful and provide guidance and respond to questions and provide encouragement, it seems to me is enormously valuable. And all of us, as individuals as well as nations, we all need that kind of support and assistance. So I think it would be a shame if we saw all of that, the value that has been added by a good number of nations, in some cases dozens of nations, helping in various ways, both in Iraq and in Afghanistan. I think it would be a shame if that ended up disappearing.
On Rumsfeld's rules, first of all, what's your favorite one? And what is it that you would advise to young emerging politicians?
Well, my goodness, I think that what I would, among the rules that I find most helpful, in business, we say what you measure improves. That is to say, if you decide what's important and establish a priority and then measure your progress towards that goal, that will improve, and that's the goal. In the military, they say the same thing differently. They say you get what you inspect, not what you expect. And so I think that's a rule that's maybe after the golden rule, an important one. I wish I'd had the book, Rumsfeld's Rules, because when I was 20 years old, they're not all Rumsfelds. Most of them are from people a lot wiser than I am. And some of them are from Sun Tzu or various other people over the decades. Mrs. Thatcher once said, the only trouble with socialism is pretty soon you run out of other people's money. And but the book pulls together a lot of thoughts and concepts. They're not all rules. Some of them are just ideas, and as I say, they're from a range of very wise people over many decades. You look at what's going on in North Korea with Kim Jong-il, and it recalls to mind Winston Churchill's comment that dictators ride the tiger, and they're afraid to get off.
What do you do when the person, the dictator, is sitting next to you, but you have to be partner with this dictator?
Oh, in countries with dictatorships, they get up every morning, and what they have to do is ask themselves, how can I perpetuate myself in office? And the only way you can do that is repression. So you have to repress, and you have to have a cadre of people around you that prop you up and protect you from people who don't want to be repressed, because the natural state of man and woman is to be free.
You mentioned once old Europe and new Europe. Iraq is gone, it's not an issue now. Is there, do you think, still this division? And if there is, what is the dividing line?
Well, what I was referring to was this. When I was U.S. ambassador to NATO in 1973, we had 15 countries in NATO, and the Iron Curtain existed. Eastern Europe was part of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet bloc. Someone in a press conference asked me the question about France and Germany being opposed to something, and the fact was that a majority of the countries in Europe then, which included all the Eastern European countries and Poland and the Czech Republic and so forth, were supporting the United States. And so I said, well, that's old Europe you're talking about, the two. And in fact, in the new Europe, which has a larger number of countries, a larger number of countries in NATO, the support for the United States and Great Britain and the other countries that were involved in the coalition was broad and deep. And the fact that France was opposing something at the time, I forget what it was really a misunderstanding on the part of the journalist.